Hey horror fans, welcome back to Room 237. Come at you with another review. And I know I still have like 9 more Universal Monster films to get to, but I'm kind of on a roll with these Hammer films, so I just kind of feel like continuing with those for a little bit. But I will be continuing with Universal Monsters, absolutely. But now we come to the 5th of the Hammer Frankenstein films. And this one is Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed, which it was released in 1969, again directed by Terence Fisher, the Hammer master, and of course again stars Peter Cushing. But this was also the first of 2 Frankenstein appearances by Veronica Carlson. Before this, she had done Dracula's Risen from the Grave. Then she did this, and then she did Horror of Frankenstein, which I know she was very unhappy with Horror of Frankenstein. I've reviewed that already because that's a standalone comedic retelling of Curse of Frankenstein. Because her character was just a damsel in distress, where here she had a pretty pretty layered emotional character with depth, and she did a great job. Also has Simon Ward, Thorley Walters, who was in the last film, as Dr. Hertz, but he's not Dr. Hertz in this, which sucks because I liked him as Dr. Hertz. Excuse me. I like him in this film, but there's a problem with his character that a lot of people have, and I agree with, that I'll get to. And it's kind of weird a film this old having a PG-13 rating, because PG-13 didn't come in until the 80s, unless these all got reevaluated at some point. But there's even a scene in this film that kind of makes me wonder how it got a PG-13. And the thing about this movie is, I would say this is a significant step up from Frankenstein Created Woman. Even though I liked the story to Frankenstein Created Woman, aside from the soul capturing, transplanting aspect, this one sort of goes back to form of what we've known Frankenstein to be. I said I liked Frankenstein Created Woman for the tragedy that's in it. This film has tragedy tenfold, and I'll explain that. Basically, because of the end of the last film, the Baron has fled his country, and he's in some other country now, in hiding. He's still cast as and called Frankenstein, so I don't know what else he was going as. But he's in this boarding house that's run by Anna, played by Veronica Carlson. And he's here because there's an old colleague of his, of Dr. Brandt, played by, actually, who played Brandt himself? George Pravda plays Dr. Frederick Brandt. Former colleague, he suffered a mental breakdown. He's in an insane asylum. But he has some sort of information that Frankenstein wants, and he wants to be able to continue working with him. So he has to try to find a way to break him out, but of course it doesn't work, so he's got to do his Frankenstein stuff. And the character of Frankenstein in this is, first of all, Peter Cushing's performance is top-notch. I find it hard to believe that he could do better than films before, but he is just on top of it in this movie. He is fantastic. But the character, they went to lengths to make Frankenstein as despicable and evil as possible. This is the most evil we have ever seen Baron von Frankenstein. He is just so cold in this movie. And of course, Peter Cushing, who just, I think I said in my Curse for Frankenstein video, it's all in his eyes. His eyes, his facial and body language, and his delivery of lines. He is just a cold, evil prick in this movie. I mean, some parts are humorous. Like, in the beginning, he's in this boarding house with there's these three upper-class gentlemen behind him who are talking, and they're talking about these doctors that have just gone crazy, and one of them is Brant. And Frankenstein's just kind of doing his own thing on his side of the room, talking about how Brant lost his mind, and then there's this other twisted doctor named Frankenstein, who I heard he had to up and leave his country because of his sick experiments. And he just turns around in his chair, and he has this smug, like, oh, I didn't know you were doctors. And they're just like, we're not doctors. And then he just quickly turns it off, and he's like, oh, I was under the impression that you knew what you were talking about. And they call him rude, and he's like, well, stupidity does bring out the worst in me. And, I mean, he just puts them in their place, and even when they say, you know, kind of ask him, like, well, explain something to us, he just says, well, I know you wouldn't get it, so I'll give you an association that you'll appreciate. It pretty much says something about how if there weren't men like him, they would still be eating meat in a cave and wiping their hands on like a coat made out of fur, like from an animal, not like a fur coat. Well, fur coats are animals, but like being a caveman. And then he just punctuates it with, which by the way, your lapel already looks somewhat greasy. So he's really smug, but he's also just, and Peter Cushing, he's so much conviction. Conviction and class, two things that Peter Cushing is great at. And just, sometimes you're just like, what a dick, but you love him for it. But then there's aspects that, okay. Anna's fiance is played by Simon Ward. His name is Carl. This guy here. He works at the insane asylum that Brant is at. And Frankenstein finds out he's been stealing some narcotics because Anna's mother is, you know, her health is failing. So Frankenstein blackmails him, saying, I need your help with these experiments. If you do, I won't go to the police. So Carl and Anna now have to help him. And he kind of looks like a mix between David Bowie and the blonde, like, rich college kid leader from a House on the Edge of the Park. Like, take David Bowie and that kid, put them together, you get Simon Ward. Which I don't know what else he was in. I guess he was in a movie. Well, this was his first film. But I guess he would go on to be in a movie called Young Winston. Whatever that is. So, and the scene where they try to or where they do bust Brant out of the hospital, there's this one redhead woman who they keep showing, but maybe I missed something as like her importance to the film. But like she's screaming the whole time, and it's very chaotic. Like, Terrence Fisher's direction is very, like, the cuts and editing and angles. Like, Terrence Fisher really went nuts with this. But is very well directed. And then there is a scene where, and this is the scene I don't like. Frankenstein walks by Anna's room. She's in a nightgown, and he rapes her. I'm not a fan of the scene. Apparently, Hammer producer James Carreras was under pressure to make the film what's the word? More appealing to American audiences. And from what I've gathered, Hammer was having a hard time funding this film, and it was actually Warner Brothers that stepped in and helped out. So I don't know if it came from Warner Brothers or if there was someone above Carreras that pretty much what they wanted to do was to sex the film up a bit. But I also heard that they just wanted the rape scene. I heard they wanted to sex it up, and that's what they landed on. Or they wanted the rape scene from the beginning. But it was not in the original script. And all three, Terrence Fisher, Veronica Carlson, and Peter Cushing, hated the scene. Hated it. And since there was no nudity in Veronica Carlson's contract, they had to shoot it in such a way where she wouldn't be exposed. So I guess they shot it a bunch of times, trying to get different angles and different ways of doing it. And eventually Terrence Fisher just flipped out. It was like, I'm done with this. We're just going to use what we have. I've had enough. But yeah, Peter Cushing also hated it. He thought it was unnecessary because it is. If you want to sex up a Hammer film, there's tons of ways you can do it. Hammer was doing it already. They're known for being sexy, like the sexier horror films. But also, I mean, even in the first film, I mean, to have him commit rape 5 movies in, where all films before he wasn't really a sexual character in any way, even when he was engaged and in love in the first film, and I always thought of Frankenstein as just like asexual, even if he really isn't, but just so committed to work and science, like he doesn't have time or interest in sex. And the scene really is out of place, because he doesn't make any advances towards her or anything. There's no hints at romance or sexual frustration. He literally just walks by her room, comes in, and starts doing it. I will say, the way it's shot was effective. I mean, with the music, the performances of both the actor and the actress, and the angles and cuts and edits used, if it had been in a different movie, it would have been effective. Because I'm not above rape scenes, but I like there to be some substance to it. Like Last House on the Left. The way it's shot, the music, the performances, and then of course you get the revenge later on. Some movies, like a Serbian film where it's just, or Human Centipede 2, where it's in there just for shock value, isn't really that shocking. So it's kind of frustrating because it's out of character for Frankenstein. It's out of place in the film and the series. I feel bad for Cushing and Carlson and Fisher that they had to do it just because. But they're such great, actors, and Terrence Fisher's such a great director. They still made an effective scene, even though it doesn't belong there. So that's kind of frustrating. But anyway, they bust out Brant. He has a heart attack. Frankenstein can do all this shit that we've seen him do the last 4 films. And he can't do anything about a heart attack. But anyway. So he takes his brain and he puts it in the body of someone else. The body of actor Freddie Jones, who would go on to be in The Elephant Man. Not sure as who. I've been wanting to see The Elephant Man for years. I really need to get on that because I do like David Lynch. And when Freddie Jones comes in, that's where the tragedy is. And I would say it is such sympathetic tragedy that really digs at your emotions and is so well acted, well performed, that it's almost up there with the first 2 Karloff Frankenstein films, the original and Bride of. He wakes up, he's in this different body, bald with stitches around the head. He finds a mirror and just the look on his face, just shock and crying. He kind of he doesn't move like a zombie, but he does walk like someone has to walk in a new body. Scares Anna, gets stabbed, and then, has to go to his wife's house. He has nowhere else to go. And when he walks into his wife's bedroom while she's sleeping, because earlier in the film, they had his body. And they tried to bury it, but like a water main broke and sort of surfaced the body. So the police were kind of looking around. Which, that's another thing. Okay. Thorley Walters, who played Dr. Hertz in the last film, who I liked. He plays a lead investigator in this. They're looking into where all these medical supplies and missing people have gone. But it's a subplot that goes nowhere. It literally does not get resolved. We go back to them once in a while for a little bit, and then literally it just ends. So, and it's been criticized for just adding runtime, and for such a serious and suspenseful movie to have just these quick little seeds of comedy feels out of place, and I agree. Which sucks because I liked Thorley Walters in this as well. But, so yeah, his wife buried his body. And, he walks in the bedroom, and when he sees her, just the tears, the look on his face, it's so tragic and so emotional. With the music and everything else, it's very well done. And I don't know what those things are called. The stand-up things that people change behind in movies. When she wakes up, he's behind it. He tries to explain what's happened. And then she doesn't accept him as her husband. She just doesn't. And, it's even more sad. You really feel for the monster in this one. Or the creation. I'm going to get into spoilers here because I really like the ending. I would probably say this is the best climax out of the whole series. It was really, it just kept building up, had a great payoff. So I'm going to say spoilers here. So definitely, I feel like you could watch these at any point, but it would be better to watch them in sequence together. But definitely check out Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. It's not very often that you hear about a 5th film in the series being really good. This is probably the first. Excuse me. So, the creation, he's hell-bent on revenge now. And since Frankenstein knows that the creation has gotten loose and been stabbed by Anna, he stabs Anna out of rage and kills her. So Carl also vows a revenge on him. But the creation knows that Frankenstein's going to track him there. So he tells his wife, like, he's come for something. I've become a victim of our own work. So, you know, he gets the papers from his safe that Frankenstein wants, the information, that reason why he saved his brain. And he tells his wife, you know, you need to flee. It's not going to go well. Which kind of sucks for her because he just pours gasoline all over the house. So she lost her husband. She's going to let this guy that has her husband's brain get revenge in her house by setting it on fire. But Frankenstein shows up, and just because he's so concerned about his work and science, he looks up at him and he's like, you and I need to continue our work together. Even after everything that's happened. Like, he doesn't give a fuck about anybody else or anything else but himself and his research and work. More so than any other film in the series. Like, Peter Cushing sells it as just the one-track mind, evil, you know, despicable sociopath that Frankenstein has become in this series. He's already poured, Brant has already poured gasoline all over the house. So he has these little lanterns. And he tells them, the papers are in the study, but the cops are coming. My wife has sent for the cops. So whenever Frankenstein goes to a door, he throws a lantern at it and it creates fire. Because, of course, Frankenstein will stop at nothing to get those papers. He finally does. He goes outside. Carl's waiting for him. They get in a fight. Carl knocks him out, but then Brant goes out and knocks out Carl. And this was the great ending, because I think this was intended to be the final film. Hence the title, how it ends, and how the next one was just an unrelated film. Loose comedic retelling of the first one. Even though after that they did do one more Peter Cushing film, which I'll get to next. Brant just picks him up over his shoulder and he just walks into the house. And when Frankenstein comes to, because Frankenstein had paper on fire and he like hit him in the face. So you get good makeup effects of like the burnt face. Also, the brain transplant scene has more blood gore effects than before. Also, the one thing worth mentioning is these sets. Before, a lot of their films were done at Bray Studios, but this one was done at Associated British Studios in of Elstree, London, which was very elaborate sets. Like it was used for a lot of different films, but it was a studio that was very intricate when it came to their set design. So that's why this one's a bit more elaborate than some of the more recent ones before this. But I like the look that Freddie Jones does when he walks into the house. He like this look of heat because he's killing himself. And he's holding on to Frankenstein as he's screaming no, and screaming in pain. And he just walks into the flames, and then we get the exterior shot of the burning house with Frankenstein screaming. And that's the end of the movie. I didn't think I was going to like this just because I'm so used to a series, sequels either being all over the place or decreasing in quality. But other than the rape scene, which was, again, shot well and out of place and unneeded and out of character, I liked the story in this. I liked it. Went back to just transplanting brains, but there was a reason why he wanted something from someone, so he had to save that brain, blackmailing people into helping him, just being as evil as possible. Really, just capitalizing on, and by capitalizing I mean like just being the culmination of everything he's done in the series, so that he could have, finally get what's coming to him. No plan B, no way out. Every performance was great. Cushing, Carlson, Simon Ward, Thorley Walters, and especially Freddie Jones as the transplanted Bran. I mean, up there with Karloff for what he did with sympathy and emotion and tragedy. This movie did so well at that. This might be... I'm probably always going to think the first one, just because that's the only Mary Shelley one in the series, will be my favorite, but this might be my second favorite. It definitely has the best climax out of the whole series. And Peter Cushing just really nailed and sold being an evil, just vile, despicable prick. Worse than ever. I was definitely impressed by this sequel. I thought it was very good. And I got to get the Blu-ray so that I can have some features, because I bet there's some good ones. And Terrence Fisher really went super erratic and crazy with the directing as opposed to previous ones in the series. So they really went for new shit, even in a fifth film, and it paid off very well. I really enjoyed this. But 27 minutes, probably going to shut off, so thanks for watching.